Why is it that some people who have never done yoga in their life can do lotus pose with ease, and yet others who may have been practicing for years can't? Well, it all has to do with your anatomy. So in this video, I'll explain what might limit the flexibility in your hips. But first, let's have a little look at the different stages of hip flexibility. So you might start off with struggling to get your knees to come to the floor. Then with time, maybe your knees can come a bit closer to the floor. Then maybe we can bring one foot on top, yet the knees quite high up. Then maybe we can bring that foot into half lotus. And then maybe we'll be able to bring the bottom foot up and enter in full lotus pose. So what affects this? Well, let's have a little bite-sized anatomy lesson. The two main things that can affect your hip mobility and flexibility are the hip joint and the muscles that surround your hip. Starting with the muscles, the key muscles affecting your hip mobility are your piriformis muscle, the hip flexors such as the psoas muscle, and the glutes. And now, depending on your lifestyle, some muscles may be tighter than others. So for example, if you sit on the floor a lot, then you are most likely to have rather open hips. On the flip side, if you spend most of the day sitting in a chair, then you will most likely have tight hips. Stretching the muscles that restrict your hip movement will help you open your hips. This is because stretching can change the structure of the muscle and can actually help us lengthen the muscles. Each muscle is made up of smaller muscle fibers that sit in line with each other. When we stretch our muscles, over time, more of these muscle fibers are added on, and that is how our muscles lengthen. Stop stretching, and over time, muscle fibers get removed, and that is how we lose our flexibility when we don't stretch. And so using double pigeon pose as an example. As I enter this pose, my glute muscles are into a stretched position. So as I increase my flexibility working on this pose, over time, more and more muscle fibers are recruited to help me increase my flexibility, up until a certain point, of course. Now, the other factor affecting hip mobility is the structure of the hip joint. Now, the hip joint is a ball and socket joint where the femur connects to the pelvis. So how does that affect whether we can enter lotus pose with ease? Well, let me share with you the 3 ways that our hip joint may be different in each and one of us. The socket part of the joint can be deep or it can be shallow. The neck of the femur can be thick or it can be narrow. It could face forward, it could face more outward or more downward. So here are 2 rather extreme examples. If you have a shallow socket and a narrow femur head, you may have this range of motion. On the other hand, if you have a deep socket and a thick femur head, then perhaps you would have this range of motion. Additionally, if the hip socket faces more forward, then squatting with feet parallel may be easier for you. While if it points more outward, then squatting with the feet outward may be easier. So coming back to our earlier example, if lotus pose is effortless for you without doing any stretching whatsoever, then it's probably because your hip joint permits for more easy external rotation. And if not, then maybe we need to work on our hip mobility and flexibility. And if you feel that you need to stretch out your muscles in order to help increase this hip mobility and flexibility, then you're going to want to check out this video next with some exercises that you could try.